Mhm. We're working. How's it going, everybody? I'm from Phoenix. Where in Phoenix, Mud? Ahwatukee, very nice. I lived I lived in Ahwatukee off of Ray, right, basically the corner of Ray and 40th, right across the street from Fry's. I lived there for about a year and a half. Hello, Penny. Hello, Raging Smirk. Darren, thanks for that picture, by the way. Mhm. Very nice. So you're out there where Chandler and Ray come together. All right. It's cold here today. Out in SoCal, no, they give what is it, sunny Southern California. That nickname does not come um by happenstance. It is generally sunny and warm here, and today it is cold. Not loving the weather today. Mm. All right. How you doing, Devil Dog? I got my hat for my wear my military hat today. This is it's a recreation. Take it off. I don't know if you guys can see it, but so this is actually I put a couple I got a fitted hat and I put a couple pins on there. Got my Gulf War veteran, my New Jersey. Oh, got my New Jersey hat today. That was a lot of fun being on that ship. We got to um we got to go everywhere we went. We were the talk. Everybody wanted to come tour the ship. Everybody wanted to see it. It was pretty spectacular. I was very fortunate to have that duty. 80 degrees in Texas. I know. I've heard. I have a friend in San Antonio and my aunt's in Dallas, North Dallas. Touche, touche. Mm. Of course, we weren't really much of a taxi. Um, we were more of like the escort. We were like the taxi would be like the LHA, um, and we would be like the or let's see we'd be like the armored vehicle that was rolling along with the taxi to protect the taxi. Oh, a little early today, but I just thought I'd get in here and say, hey, you guys. Oh, what is this? Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking right now. Done. I have a um interesting I'm reading a couple of books right now um that I'm sure will get discussed today. One of them is it wasn't about slavery. Let's see. Right here. Let's see, come on. There we go. That's one of them. And then another one was, let's see if I can get this one to show up right. I think it's an angle. This is so. There we go. The Real Lincoln, by Thomas D. Lorenzo. Amazing, amazing perspective on on uh, um, on the Civil War and on Lincoln as a whole. Is really, really. It was really interesting about the Civil War. Um, does okay? I know everybody's going to say slavery, but does anybody have any idea of any other reason for the Civil War? Does anybody? There's a little bit of a delay in the comment, so there's a delay from the time that you see me to the time that you can, from when I talk to when you hear it. Yes, Gloria, big star for you. Yes, it was tariffs. It was tariffs. The Southern economy was agrarian, and they imported almost all the stuff that they were getting, and because they had to import goods, and they were the primary exporter of all the cotton. They exported 75% of the world's cotton, and it was the bulk of the industrial output of the North, that was an export, was from cotton, textile mills and whatnot. So anyway, the North was in charge really of the government with with the Republicans. Well, actually, that's not totally true. I'm not going to misspeak on that one, but I am going to say that the the government put on like 40% tariffs, 40 to 45% tariffs, and they were charging these tariffs to the import goods. Well, on the imported goods, well, the South was the ones that, because they were agrarian and they weren't making anything on their own, they were the ones that were having to pay the high prices of the tariffs, and pass down through the cost of goods. And the North was taking the tariff money that they were getting, and they were spending it on themselves, up for all the basically corporate welfare up in the North. And the South wasn't seeing any of the benefit of the tariff money. So they're like, forget this, we're out. Deuces, we're done. So South Carolina was the first. There was one that was the tariff of abomination, I think. And if you go back and you look at, and 10 years prior to the Civil War, they had the South Carolina nullified one of the tariffs when Jackson was president, and he was not happy about that. Then, in fact, Calhoun was Jackson's vice president, and he resigned and was given a he was given he was appointed as senator from South Carolina. Anyway, then but what the South did when South Carolina and several of the southern states seceded, what they did was they were going to open up their ports for these people to come and bring their goods. And when they did, they were going to charge them like 10%, saying that if 10% was good enough for God, 10% was good enough for us. So what was going to happen is that all the shipping that was coming in, that was dropping off their goods up in the northern ports, in Philadelphia and New York and Boston, well, they were going to be charging 45% tariffs. But if they took them down to Charleston or Mobile, Alabama, or New Orleans, they were going to charge 10% tariffs. So where do you think all the goods were going to go? Especially with the advent of the railroads, you had all the railroads and all the railroad was on the south. So it was essentially, it would have bankrupted the northern states. So Lincoln had to have the tariff money to fund the government. So he literally, quite literally, he baited the South into firing the first shot. Hold on one second. Hey, I'm doing a YouTube video. Let me call you in about an hour. Look it up. So yeah, and use their own banking system. Exactly, Darren. Exactly. They're going to get rid of the Rothschild banking system. Yes, Mud. In actuality, the North, or Britain, actually had they had like 50,000 troops. I want to say it was 50. I may be getting that number incorrect, but they had like 50,000 troops up in Canada. I know what, I think it was more like 10. I think it was more like 10. They had like 10 or 20,000 troops up in Canada, and that they were going to and Lincoln was doing everything they could to prevent England from coming in on the side of the South. Another interesting thing about the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation, while we think that's what that Lincoln was freeing the slaves, he wasn't really freeing any of the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was a war tool to keep Europe out of the war, because if in Europe the predominant attitudes towards slavery was emancipation and abolition. So if the North committed to freeing the slaves and having a United States that was free of slavery, then they wouldn't have come in on the side of the South to fight against the North. So just some interesting history that I never really know. I always suspected there was some chicanery going on about the Civil War. It was too convenient to summarize the entire war into a war of slavery, or a war about slavery. This was way too convenient. So I wonder where Doug is. It's almost 3:00. We call him, actually. Oh, I guess he didn't get the link. See if that works. Exactly. He's getting a Dr. Pepper. Very well said, Mud. Hello, Monica and Mary Poppins. I believe that. I believe that, Darren. They were all friends. All of the high-ranking officers in the military, they were all friends. They fought together in the Mexican-American War, or as they called it, just the Mexican War. And in fact, it was I think it was Ulysses S. Grant who said that it was a wicked war. It was a very wicked war. And actually several of the generals wanted to resign their commission because they were opposed. Actually, if there's one person who knows more about the Mexican War, it's this gentleman right here. He is an astute historian on the Mexican-American War. Actually, is it the Mexican-American War or the
Mexican-American War?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was
War of Liberation.
As I was telling them about the books I'm reading with Real Lincoln, and it wasn't about slavery, and kind of going over just some overall 50,000 foot view of what was going on there. So
I remember when I first mentioned in Constitution class that you were in, that Lincoln was on my list of 5 worst presidents. You were one of the people who went,
Oh no.
Was it
really?
you?
No,
yeah, I think
that
you
was
were. That's a while back though. It's before you start reading that stuff.
No, I maybe that was.
Yeah, because you remember that's like 2015, I think.
No, I yeah. Okay.
When you started kind of going to that class, maybe around there.
Okay. I'll.
But nonetheless, whether that's the case or not, I've had a lot of people kind of go, "Whoa, what?"
Yeah.
They're surprised, and I tend not to spend a lot of time on that because number one, I'm trying to educate people about the Constitution, not freak people out. But I do touch on it because people need to know it. If that makes sense.
I think because I wasn't a fan of Lincoln, because I always believed that the South had a right to secede. So I wasn't a fan of Lincoln because I believed him to be a despot. But I think the reason that I probably had that look was because my question to you, or you, it was the 5 constitutional liars or 7 constitutional liars or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but the 5 worst presidents and why, and you said Lincoln. So I was like, huh? So anyway,
matter of fact, in my book, The 7 Worst Constitutional Liars, he is my epilogue. In other words, he's not one of the 7, but he's like right there on the edge of being one of those 7. And really, because John Marshall and Hamilton actually did more damage even than Lincoln, as bad as Lincoln was. But Lincoln did a lot of damage. And now, not that I mean to defend him at all. This shirt feels like it's lopsided. But not that I'm trying to defend him at all, but we do have to remember that Lincoln came up through law school during the tail end of John Marshall's reign as Chief Justice. So in a way, he was a product of his environment. I'm not giving him a pass necessarily, but there were a lot of influences that sent him in that,
sure. Firm
union direction.
So, Monica, this is, let me see if I can, this is the book that I'm reading, The Real Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, Dilorenzo.
Yeah, this book. Yeah.
Yeah. See, great minds think alike. That's if you want to, that book goes into a lot of detail. That's a much better, you're able to do it. That's a great book.
Thomas, make it a part of your body.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great book.
Well, Thomas J. DiLorenzo is one of my favorite writers, and what's funny is how I came across him originally is when my daughter, who's now 32. But anyway, when she was in college, one of her professors on his list of books that they could read was Thomas J. DiLorenzo's book, Hamilton's Curse. And I had not heard of the book. And being the type of person I was, it's like, honey, I'm glad you chose a book that Ron Paul's on the cover of as endorsing, but nonetheless, let me read it first,
Yeah.
And I read it and I was like, honey, you not only could do a book report on this, man, I want to help, and I want the book after you're done with it, or, but, and then I started looking more into Thomas J. DeLorenzo. And while I already had my feelings about Lincoln, when I read his book, it definitely opened up, answered a lot of questions that I had. Put it that way.
And Tiffany wants to say that she bought Creator, and it's excellent.
Thank you. Very cool. So the rest of you who haven't bought Creator yet, now you know. Thank you. I'm very proud of Creator. I really like how it came out.
Excellent. Well, we didn't come here to talk about Lincoln. We came here to talk about Article 1, Section 3.
Right. Which includes the 3/5 clause.
With the 3/5 clause, which kind of ties into slavery a little bit.
A little bit. It's funny because I was talking, I can't remember who it was I was talking to. I think it was on a Patriot Soapbox when I was with Alan on his For the Republic show. And we were talking about a little bit about that stuff and freedom and liberty and all that. And I spoke up, and also on Constitutional Radio, I think we talked about this. One of my favorite people in history is Frederick Douglass. Escaped slave, taught himself how to read, basically watching the white kids and then asking the white kids to help him, and he would give the poor white kids bread and they would help him learn how to read. That's kind of how he did it. But anyway, and one of his quotes, I've got many quotes of his that I love, but this one, knowledge is the ultimate emancipator.
I love that.
It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, and it is, and that's the reason why I educate, because I really do believe that in order to move forward, in order to do what we need to do, we need to be knowledgeable. We need to understand what we're up to and how we're doing it. And when you understand the way our system's supposed to be through the original intent of the Constitution, it opens up ideas on how to do it, and the solutions begin to reveal themselves. But for those of you who read Creator, and those of you maybe it haven't, no matter what we do, the first step is spiritual faith. That's it. It starts with that. None of the other stuff happens if we don't have our spiritual house in order. How are we going to get our political house in order? It's kind of the way I like to put it. Okay.
Well, I think a good lead-in. Speaking of Frederick Douglass, and we're talking about the 3/5 clause. It was you that educated me on one of his sayings, that he's read the document and it was the most anti-slavery document ever.
Well, what he said was,
or something along those lines.
I have studied Constitution, and I have determined it is not a pro-slavery document. That's basically what he said. But yeah, you're on the right track.
I'm there. Close.
Yeah, close enough. And Frederick Douglass. And when I talk about Frederick Douglass, it's funny because the woke CRT people, they'll mention him kind of as a side shot because he's a black man of history. They really don't go deep into him. Why? Because
he would
kill their narrative if people really understood him.
Just totally destroy their narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So
that's rewriting history.
Talked about Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. And we talked about separation of powers, all that stuff. If you missed it, the YouTube link, our YouTube shows are still there.
Yep.
Because we've been very careful on what we say and what we put on the.
We've skirted it a little bit, and there have been a couple of slip ups.
Yeah,
but for the most part,
I've accidentally said a few words like but aside from that,
right.
All right.
In the context of what we're discussing, it's
and as much as I love Scott and all that, the reality is not having his title and all that in the wording on the page. It's unfortunate because I love the guy.
I know.
And I mean, you say his name, you write his name, you put Patriot, title there. I mean, I put it on Political Pistachio, but you know what's funny is Political Pistachio is through Blogger, who got bought by Google. So I'm surprised that my blog has not been policed. So, but anyway,
they when I was creating channels for him, we did. I mean, I was trying to do it in code with like PSF, and even
Okay.
that got flagged.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they've launched Google, the search engine, and Facebook has kind of latched onto the political pistachio thing. So I pretty much get banned
High
on
five,
stuff
brother.
that.
You're on the list. High five.
Yeah, political pistachio is on the list, but Mr. Constitution has not been flagged that I can see yet.
Right.
So I look Mr. Constitution up on Google. I still show up. So, all right.
Well,
I'm in the process, by the way, of trademarking that, and we got to give Ron the kudos because he's the one who came up with Mr. Constitution. All right. So Article 1, Section 2, the House. Okay, real quick overview. So we're going to talk about the two houses of Congress, what makes them up, how they are established, and then once we get that down, then we're going to get into the apportionment of the members of the House of Representatives, and that's where the 3/5 clause then comes in. And so we'll get to the 3/5 clause at the tail end here. Okay. So Article 1, Section 2, first paragraph: the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. So from the very beginning, 2-year terms, democratically elected. The districts are set up based on population, the whole bit. Gerrymandering, you've heard of that. And a lot of people like to say gerrymandering. It's gerrymandering. Eldridge Gerry was accused of using this method to get votes. And one political writer said that the district that they had made to favor Eldridge Gerry looked like a salamander. And hence, gerrymandering came from. But from the very beginning, the members of the House of Representatives were democratically elected by the people based on districts that are based on population. Then it's 2-year terms. And the electors in each state, who are the electors? These are the people who are going to be voting for president. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. In other words, the qualifications for the electors is going to be the same as what the qualifications is for the members of the House. Is all it's saying. Okay. And then it says what the qualifications are. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years. You have to be at least 25. I've been 7 years a citizen of the United States. So you don't have to have been the born citizen or citizen all your life. You could be a naturalized citizen, but you still need to be a citizen in order to hold office. And the next part, I'm going to read the whole thing because if I read it by itself, it'll be confusing. So let me start from the beginning again. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. That is saying they have to be an inhabitant of a state in which they're chosen. I know it says, and who shall not, but remember, it begins with no person. No person who shall not. Double negative, which means they have to. I know it's weird. This is always a conversation because the way it's worded, it's kind of confusing, but it's a double negative. So it's saying you have to be an inhabitant of the state in which you are. Now, notice it doesn't say you have to be an inhabitant of the district.
Huh.
So Maxine Waters is accused of, being messed up because while she used to live in the district, she now has a mansion outside the district she represents. Doesn't say in the Constitution you have to be a resident of the district. It says you have to be a resident of the state.
Interesting.
Now the resident of the district, if you're not resident of the district, people frown on that. It's kind of that carpetbagger thing. But nonetheless, you don't have to be a resident of the district. And sometimes these people will play with the resident of the state thing. For example, remember Mary Bono Mack, our
I do.
Used to be married to Sonny Bono, and then she, now she's married to Connie Mack, who is a Congress critter out of Florida. She lives in Florida, but she was serving as a member of the Congress in California. Well, she had a second home in Palm Springs. She claimed that as her residency for the purpose of her political office, even though really she lived in Florida.
Hmm.
So these people, they play games. It drives me nuts. But anyway, so members of the House, long story short, it's no different than it was in the beginning. 2-year terms, democratically elected by people, so on and so forth. Now, let's flip the page because over to section 3, because I want to talk about the senators. Since we'll talk about the House and Senators kind of together here. So page 2, if you're using this pocket costume, well, this one's actually pretty bad looking, but this is the style from the National Center of Constitutional Studies. Yeah, that one looks much newer. Mr. Constitutions should look like this. Well used, well worn, opened often.
I have about like 20 of these things. So
that's it.
that's it.
I have about 400 right now. I go through about when I'm busy, I go through about 400 a month.
I believe that.
But anyway,
I have
about
I
like
have one in each
because it's so
car.
important. Huh?
I have one in every car. I have one in my briefcase or my
Very
bag.
good.
So yeah, I always got one with me.
And then I've got one on my phone just in case I don't have the paper copy, man. It comes up. Okay. So the U.S. Senate, Section 3, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state. So already we see how it's different. With the House, it's based on population, but in the Senate, it's 2 per state, period, regardless of population. That has not changed. Then you'll see in brackets, it says chosen by the legislature thereof. The brackets means that is no longer the case. 17th Amendment changed that in 1913. It used to be that the senators were chosen by the state legislatures. They appointed the members of the U.S. Senate, and the senators were the voice of the state legislatures in Congress. Having a bicameral Congress, meaning we have not just 2 houses, but that the 2 houses are supposed to be unique, different from each other. That was important because you have one house being the voice of the people, one house being the voice of the states. And now the senators are democratically voted in, just like the House is. So they're really not any different. I'm going to lift my hat a little bit because that way the light's properly on my face.
By the way, did you see my hat today?
Yeah, I saw the New Jersey. I had another friend who was on the New Jersey. He was on the Jersey, matter of fact, when Beirut was bombed. And
that was 84.
The Jersey was there.
84, 85, yeah.
But were you on the Jersey at that time?
I got on in 89.
Oh, okay, yeah. My friend Dave Hiller was on the Jersey, and he and I wound up serving together at a PSD later when I was on the verge of getting out of the Navy. The last 6 months of my time in the Navy, I was stationed at a PSD as they were slowly processing me out. But anyway, and he was a SEAL washout. Went to SEAL school and all that. He said, hey, man, he handled the physical part okay. It was the mental stuff that killed him. But anyway, so it says that chosen by the legislature thereof. So we've changed for 6 years instead of a 2-year, 6. So we have 2 years for a House, 6 years for the Senate. The president is 4. So notice they've got everything kind of varied so that you don't have the same crew for the same amount of time all together. We don't want that kind of uniformity because that's how you then create collusion, teams, tyrannies, and so forth. So you want to mix it up a little bit. And each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after they shall be assembled, in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided equally and may into 3 classes. And what the next part is, I'm not going to read the whole thing, is it basically says that 1/3 of those who got elected to the Senate will be up for re-election in 2 years, 1/3 of them in 4 years, and 1/3 of them in 6 years. Once that is through, then after that, everybody holds office for 6 years and is up for re-election. They did that because they wanted to stagger the senatorial elections. They didn't want every 6 years suddenly the entire Senate being re-elected. It could totally change. They wanted it to do 1/3 at a time every 2 years. Now, the 2 years, of course, coincides with the House elections. So 1/3 of the senators, right on very beginning, every 2 years, is up for re-election. And they did that once again by splitting the original senators up into 3 groups. The first group only served for 2 years, then they were up for re-election. Second group, Group B, if you want to call it that, 4 years, and then the Group C got to do their full 6. And then after that, just staggered the elections. Okay. Then it says in the next paragraph, no person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years. So rather than 25, you got to be 30. So the Senate is the upper house. It's the more important house. It's the one where the people should have more political experience, more political savvy, and apparently a little bit wiser based on their time on this planet, or at least that's what they were trying to do here. And let's see, 30 years and 9 years a citizen of the United States. Remember, with the House, it was 7 years. So the requirement, once again, is more stringent with the U.S. Senate. And here we are with our double negative again. And who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state for which he shall be chosen. Remember, it began with no person. Double negative means he has to be an inhabitant of the state in which he is chosen. So you have 2 houses. You have a bicameral Congress. You have a question.
This is my question. Is a double negative, is that more definitive than just laying it out? Is that why they did it that way?
I don't know. They didn't discuss why they did the double negative. I do have to discuss it often, though, because the way it's worded, people get confused real fast with it. I don't know why they did it that way, but
Can you speculate?
I know they spoke and wrote very differently back then than we do now. That may have been just the tendency of the times. I tell you what, one of the tendencies of the times, for example, that's a little bit different nowadays, is they used to capitalize words for emphasis. In fact, I just wrote an article about the Sherman copy of the Declaration of Independence, and the Thomas Paine National Historical Association actually points this out, that that's what they used to do. It was kind of nice to be confirmed that I know what I'm talking about by some other scholarly organization. But anyway, and italicizing was around. Italics has been around since about 500 AD. It began with the Romans. They would italicize. In other words, slant words to put emphasis. But the founding fathers, they preferred capitalization, either capitalizing in the first letter of a word or all caps. And that was just their style. And that may be the case here, where their style was they preferred the double negatives. I don't know. Be honest with you, I haven't really gotten into why they did it that way. I haven't found any paperwork on that. And one of the things that's difficult about figuring out why, because a lot of people will ask me, well, why did they do that? One of the problems with trying to figure out why is that during the War of 1812, the Library of Congress, along with the White House, was burned up. That means all of the federal records from the founding of our country until that moment got burned up. So we lost a lot of records. So records that we have, it's by chance that we come across these things, or it's by correspondence or state houses. For example, the Sherman copy of the Declaration. There, we know that there was this copy. What they did when they were working on the Declaration of Independence is when Jefferson made his original, John Adams then copied them 5 times to give to each of the people to look over for approval. The Sherman copy being the one that was copied over for Sherman. What was found recently was only the first page. That's all we have of it. Mm-hmm. But in it, there is evidence of things such as, you can see where they erased lowercase and put an uppercase, things like that. So they did it on purpose, in other words, with the uppercase. But what's interesting about this, how it was found, was that particular copy of the Constitution, the Sherman, or Declaration, the Sherman copy, was in the paperwork of a brigadier general from the War of 1812. And it had been auctioned off, his paperwork, and then discarded by a historian, and another historian grabbed it out of being discarded, was going through it, and it was slipped in there. Nobody even knew it was in there. And so a lot of our records about what happened back then is kind of by chance that we even have those records. Because like I said, the British burned down the Library of Congress. So sometimes it is hard to answer these questions. 90% of my studies about the Constitution is based on Madison's notes and correspondence between these people, because the actual records, for the most part, got burned up. So it's almost like putting together a very, very difficult puzzle sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and Tracy, no, it wasn't an accidental fire. That was the War of 1812.
Yeah, War of 1812. They, the British, well, you got to remember, the British didn't see us as a sovereign country. They saw all of our federal government stuff as illegal. It was an illegal government. We were still just a bunch of petulant colonists to them.
But we remained as such even after we beat them twice.
Yeah. But it wasn't until after the War of 1812 they finally kind of, threw their hands up, said, "All right, fine, you're a sovereign, independent country."
Well, actually, they still wanted to come in.
Oh, well, sure.
I'm under from what I understand.
To this day, they want to.
Exactly. To this day.
Yeah, but officially, we weren't accepted as a.
They sent they sent
recognized until after the War of 1812.
Yeah, well, they sent troops over here for and they were up in Canada for this before the Civil War.
Well, they wanted us to be divided because, that's a path we don't need, rabbit trail we don't need to be jumping on today. But we'll talk about that in the future. Absolutely. But when it comes to official recognition and all that, we weren't officially recognized as a sovereign country by Britain until after the War of 1812. France recognized us as a sovereign country the moment the Treaty of Paris in 1783 was signed, which was the ceasefire for the Revolutionary War, or cease of hostilities, I guess is what you would call it. It wasn't even really an end of the war treaty if you really read it. It's kind of like the Treaty of Versailles. It was really just a ceasefire. But anyway, so sometimes, just to get back to the original point here. So when someone says, "Well, gosh, why did they do that?" Sometimes I don't know, just simply because the records are so scarce. And sometimes I know only because I've put together pieces of puzzles from letters, correspondence, just like the Sherman copy. I had not really studied it real heavy until just the last few days. I knew of its existence, but I had not spent a lot of time on it until the last few days, because I'm a constant student. There's also an Adams copy that's known, the Livingston copy of the Declaration, and let's see, the Livingston copy and the Franklin copy have never been discovered. The original draft of the Declaration by Jefferson is presumed lost, but the Jefferson copy that resembles those other two, the Adams copy and the Sherman copy, that is at the Library of Congress, and that's the one that's the most clearly readable and best condition. And that's the one where it was discovered there was 138 words of anti-slavery language in the original draft of the Constitution. Was that copy, and had it not been for that copy, and you can kind of read it in the Adams copy, nobody would have known about that original anti-slavery language. So it's just, it's a once again, it's a puzzle piece situation. We'll try and put together the puzzle pieces. But anyway, thank you for the question, though. I appreciate it. I do know quite a bit about this stuff because I've been piecing together the puzzle, but that's one I just don't know why they use the double.
If I had the question, then I'm sure other people did as well. So that's why I asked.
No, absolutely. And questions are good. And most of the time I can come up with an answer, but I admit it. There are some things I just don't know about this stuff. And once again, a lot of it's because a lot of the records got lost or burned up.
And I didn't know that. So I learned something new today.
Very good. Very good. Okay. So let's continue on. So we've got these two houses of Congress, and originally they're different from each other. One is the voice of the people. One of them is the voice of the states. Now, remember, the states sent their delegates to this constitutional convention to create this federal government. So they want to have oversight over this thing that they've created. So they're going to send their senators to the U.S. Senate. State legislatures are going to appoint the senators. That's the way the state legislatures can have their people in the lawmaking process as oversight. And you'll notice that the Senate also, later on, you'll notice anyway, that it has duties that the rest of the government doesn't have, like ratifying treaties, confirming appointments, things like that. That was the state legislature's way of making sure they were in on the inner workings of this federal government that they had created. Now, what changed that, once again, I'll mention it one more time, 1913 17th Amendment. The more you get to know me, the more you get to realize how much I really hate that amendment. It's the repeal of the 17th Amendment is at the very top of my constitutional wish list. And for good reason. It is a large thing that moved us away from being a republic, a constitutional republic. One of the key components of being a republic, and not a democracy, pure democracy, is the fact that we have a dual constituency. In other words, the states are constituents just like the people.
Mm-hmm. I always ask I love to ask the question. It's like, who's the constituency of the Senate? And most people say, huh? They don't know. And then when I tell them the constituency of the Senate is the states, and then I explain it, they're like, holy crap, I had no idea. And that's when I use it as a segue. It's like, well, you need to come, listen to our Constitution classes.
Very good, very good. So he's out there marketing, man.
Hey,
are you guys marketing too? Well, got to get people out. But anyway, not that I'm trying to put any weight on your shoulders, but 17th Amendment, and when I talk about 17th Amendment, and I won't get too much into this right now, but then that's where also the 1964 case of Reynolds v. Sims comes in. If you want to look it up later, go for it. But when I get into the 17th Amendment, I'll spend more time on that. And what that did is that changed how the state senates operated, because the state senates were originally modeled after the original manner of the U.S. Senate. But things have been changing, and it has not been good. All right, so now we've got this Congress has been established. And so we know that's 2 senators per state for the Senate, but in the House, it doesn't say that. In the House, it says that it shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of several states. And what does that mean? It doesn't say how many per state. Well, then it goes into the enumeration. And the enumeration is going to be based on population. But back then, we had a caveat when it came to population. It wasn't just the citizen population. There was another group of people who may or may not need to be considered when it came to the enumeration. Now, let me back up. Let me settle this for you. Enumeration, meaning how many representatives does a state get based on their population? And of that population, who gets counted? Now, today we have this question of whether or not illegal aliens should be counted. Well, back then the question was, should slaves be counted? Because they're in the country. But here's the problem. In the North, let's stop here for a second. At the time of the writing of the Constitution, every single state was still a slave state. Every single state, it was still legal to have slaves. However, the largest concentration of slaves were in the southern states, Virginia on down. Mm-hmm. And the reason why was 2 reasons. Number one, because those were the more agricultural states. So that's where the need for the inexpensive labor was needed. Number one. Number two, also in the northern states, there was an abolitionist movement that had already began to swell. And while the state laws had not begun to reflect that yet, a lot of the local laws did, and it was becoming harder and harder to be a legitimate slave owner in the North because of the laws and because, well, up there wasn't as much agriculture. There was, but not as much.
Yeah, servitude in the North was much more of a domestic nature.
Right, it was much more of a domestic nature. Exactly.
And there was a lot of
slaves. And
there was a lot of slaves in New York. A lot of slaves in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So
New
New York
York,
actually,
yeah, New
New
York,
York, I think New York had the highest concentration of slaves in the North because of New York City,
right.
because people were slaves and they were slaves
Well, and
in
also there was a lot of wealthy in
mhm,
New York City that could afford the
right.
slaves. But anyway, to continue on, so the larger concentration of slaves were in the South. So that means the ratio, free person versus slave. Notice I don't say free white person. Free person versus those enslaved. There were free black persons in the North and the South. There were free non-white individuals in the North and the South. There was, in some cases, though it was very minimal, there was also some white enslaved individuals. Now, in most cases, when it came to the white enslaved people, it was a indentured servitude. In other words, they had made that decision, and there was a limit on it, like typically 7 years. What would happen often is, in order to get to the New World, sometimes someone couldn't afford the trip, so someone who needed someone to help them on their farm or in the ranch or whatever, they would pay for the person's passage to America. But then in return, that person would work for them for 7 years as an indentured servant. Normally, those were Europeans that did that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once again, there are also free black persons. You look at, for example, the Revolutionary War, that painting of Washington crossing the Delaware River.
Mm-hmm.
2 persons in the very front of that boat, they're black. And no, they weren't Washington slaves. They were free black persons who were fighting on the side of the revolutionaries with George Washington. Matter of fact, David Barton has a book, American History in Black and White, that goes over a lot of this stuff. It's a really good book. I recommend it. All right, now that I've gotten that all out of the way, so we've got this situation here where there's a larger concentration then of slaves from Virginia down. The ratio white to black, free to slave is different than it is in the North. There is a much heavier slave population and a lighter free population in the South than there is in the North.
What were the numbers? Do you know off the top of your head?
I couldn't give you the actual numbers off the top of my head. I've got it written somewhere in one of my files. Maybe I ought to pull that out sometime.
I'll look it up right now. Go ahead.
But the ratio was something. And basically what it was determined was this. If you were not to count slaves at all in the enumeration for the House of Representatives, the Congress, the House of Representatives, would be dominated by the states in the North. They would have more representatives, overwhelmingly more than the Southern states in the House. And the fear was then they would use their strength in the House to overwhelm the Southern states with legislation. But the problem is, if you counted then slaves completely, every slave counting as, one, you talk about the entire population as being counted for enumeration, then because of that number of slaves in the South, the Southern states would have an overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives, and then the fear was they would control the North through legislation.
So here's the numbers in the estimated population of 1780. Actually, here's the 1790 census.
Okay.
So in the North, there was 40,000 slaves. The total population was 1.8 million. In the South, you had 1.9 million with 650,000 slaves. So the percentage slave was 34%, and the percentage slave in the North was 2%. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, there were slaves in the North. Slavery had not been abolished in the North yet, but it was such a small number. But anyway, so get back to this. So the idea is, okay, so we don't want the northern states dominating the South in the legislature, and we don't want the southern states, the slave states, those who are pushing to keep slavery, dominating the legislature either. So how do you make sure that neither of them has that kind of power in Congress? You come up with a mathematical solution. So if the total slave population puts the South in charge and no slave population puts the North in charge, then what you do is you figure out what's that middle ground. So if you count 3/5 of the slave population towards enumeration, the number of representatives per state
balances out
between North and South.
No. It's interesting because I have friends that to this day say that, oh, well, we were just counted as 3/5 of a person. And that's not the case. It's
Nope.
not the case at all. In fact, the 3/5 clause was basically a balancing. It was balancing to ensure that slavery wasn't the people that wanted slavery.
Yeah, it limited their authority and their voice.
It limited the authority of both, so that
Yeah.
so that one couldn't have one. Neither could get more.
Mhm.
It was just balancing it out. So it had nothing to do. So from that standpoint, it was actually the 3/5 clause actually prevented the furtherance of slavery.
Yeah.
Which and while I do agree that slavery was an issue in the Civil War, it wasn't the issue. It was about like 10%, but the vast majority of it, if that, the vast majority of it was the tariff situation that we discussed before the show.
That's a part of it. There was so many things going on. There was so many factors. And while slavery was definitely on the table as an ingredient to what was going on that led to that war, the abolition of slavery was not.
Correct.
In fact, the Republican Party, they say, well, it was formed to abolish slavery. Well, if that was the case, they were anti-slavery, the Republican Party originally. That's really kind of one of its
that was one of their party
original
platforms.
Foundational principles. However, the politicians in the Republican Party, or at least many of them, didn't argue for abolishing slavery. They argued for containing slavery, to keep it from spreading beyond its existing borders.
Right. And an interesting side note, because this is a perfect opportunity to discuss this side note. The vast majority, the reason that the North didn't have slaves, I mean, part of it had to do with the fact that there wasn't a lot of agriculture, but there was some agriculture. But the vast majority, the largest reason that they didn't have slavery up in the North is that the northern states didn't like Black people. They didn't want them there.
Right.
So
racism.
But you're never taught that. You're never taught that. What was it that you said? You said it the other day. Was it you that was telling me that about the people in the North, like they like
people in the North and Lincoln and a lot of those people, that what they thought was a good idea was, if the slaves were freed, to send them back to Africa to have or somewhere else where there's a colony for these emancipated slaves.
It wasn't you. It was my friend. He said, because I told him basically what I just said to you, and he says, I absolutely agree with that. The people in the North, they like the idea of Black people, but they don't want them as their neighbor.
Right.
And the people in the South, they may not like the race, but they love their neighbor. So
here's something else.
And those were his words, my friend's words, not mine.
And here's something else, another misnomer that's going on that I kind of knew, but I really discovered on my last trip out to the South in October, is this idea today that Southerners are super racist. And it's really the flip side. It's really in the North.
Exactly. It is. It really is.
In the South, and when I was in the South, I didn't see the racism I see on the West Coast or I've seen in the Northeast. I didn't see it. I didn't see the segregation either. Everybody just, doing their job. And there was actually a lot of a larger black representation in all neighborhoods than I've ever seen anywhere else. And I got talking to my friend, and I apologize, this really is his name, John Hancock. And John L. Hancock, he wrote the book Liberty Inherited. You can look it up. But and there's another one he wrote, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But anyway, so I'm having breakfast with my friend John, his wife, and my buddy Harry, and at a Cracker Barrel, and he says, "Well, Doug, you have to understand the reason why you don't see the racism in the South that the left tries to claim exists is because they've already dealt with the issue, the civil rights issue, and all of that was heaviest in the South. They've dealt with it and they're good with it. They're done. They're done with it. They've gone through that process. They've gone through the process of having to come to their senses and all that jazz. The North's never gone through that process. So they're actually still racist, more racist up there because they never went through that process that the South had to go through. The problem is the South, the left is trying to convince you that it's still 1850.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that because in the South, they didn't, the South was more
come to terms with it.
Well, no, the issue of racism in the South was they had, because of the population, because it was 34% of the population, and that's just the slave population. In the South, you had free black people, and they didn't have the animosity towards the black people in the South that they did in the North. Livingston talks a lot about that by going through a lot of the literature and letters and stuff from yesteryear. From the pre-Civil War.
Robert Livingston?
No, Don Livingston from the Abbeville Institute. He's a YouTube channel, but he's an author.
So you're not talking about a historical figure. You're talking about someone nowadays. Okay.
No, he's a historian. He's a historian on the level of De Lorenzo, and he talks a lot about the attitudes of the South because the South actually had black troops fighting along, integrated into their units. Free black men actually volunteered to fight for the South, and they were integrated in with the troops. Right. So in the Northern troops, you had when they would contraband, and they were used as slave labor basically in the North for the Northern armies, and then ultimately they were granted permission to form their own units, but they were never integrated into the military. Shoot, it wasn't until World War II that they were integrated into the military.
Well, actually, they were integrated in the military in the 1880s, 90s, and then Woodrow Wilson resegregated the military again.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that because I thought the Buffalo Soldiers were all black units.
They were, but there were integrated units that they did exist in the 1880s, 1890s, and the 1910s. I didn't know that. But Woodrow Wilson, being the racist that he was,
a Northerner,
segregated
a Northerner,
and a Democrat, big time progressive.
Yeah. So they desegregated the military in World War II, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Well, it was
towards the end of World War II,
and then I'm trying to remember who it was that reversed that. Was it Truman? I think it was Truman. It
was Truman. Yeah. It was either immediately after World War II or towards the end of World War II.
Yeah,
when he desegregated the military.
Right.
So,
but and Truman, you read a lot about Truman, and while he was a Democrat, he had a lot of not hard left ideas. He was one. He wasn't a great president, but he was a lot better than most of the Democrats in history. Definitely better than FDR or someone like Woodrow Wilson. But anyway, all right. Well, very good. But anyway, so 3/5 clause. Now I'm going to read now that we've talked about it, I'm going to read it so that we understand what we're talking about here. So representatives and direct taxes. Now this is interesting. They talk about the representatives of the House and direct taxes. I'll get into that in a minute. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union according to the respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons and excluding Indians not taxed, What's the difference between an Indian not taxed and an Indian that's taxed? An Indian that's not taxed is still part of the tribal nation. Indian taxed has left the tribal nation, has become an American. So Indians not taxed. 3/5 of all other persons. Notice there's no race here. It's about, whether you're free or not, because there was a mixture. So it's saying free persons, not counting Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. In other words, the total population. 3/5 of all other persons, the 3/5 of the total population. It's not saying, 3/5 of each of them. It's not what it's saying. And then it goes on to say the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting in Congress of the United States, and then within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. That would then coincide with the census. Why the first time 3 years? They wanted the census to be on the decade marks, the zeros, in the years, and 1787, right? So 3 years, that puts the first census at 1790. And then every 10 years. That way it's at the end of each decade that they're doing the census. And the purpose of the census, then, according to this, is, now let's get back to the beginning of this, representatives and direct taxes. Well, what does it mean, and direct? What does that mean? Well, taxation, the direct taxation by the federal government was on the states, not the people. And therefore, the enumeration, the census, was important for that, because the states were the ones paying for the budget, and then they would tax us later. We were being indirectly taxed. In other words, the states were directly paying for it. And the states were paying the percentage of the federal budget based on their percentage of the population, hence the reason for the census. So like today, California is like 12% of the country's population. So if the old method was in play right now, the state of California would pay 12% of the budget because they have 12% of the population. That's why it says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. Now, when the states were paying that portion, since they were the states and they were having oversight over the federal government, they want to make sure it behaved. What do you think they did with that budget?
They kept it in line.
They took a look at it, and if they didn't like stuff, they declined to pay it. Now, what's the federal government going to do to a state if it declines paying its portion? It's not going to do anything to the state. It's going to say, yes, sir, we'll fix it. Because the states were in charge. They were the bosses.
That's right.
But now you are directly taxed. So you say, I don't want to pay that whole thing. That's junk. I've got an orange jumpsuit for you, buddy.
Exactly.
But the states could say, you know what? This is junk. I'm not paying for that. I'm not paying for that. That's unconstitutional. That's unreasonable. That's downright illegal. Try again. Send us a budget we're willing to pay. Now, understand that means then that if the federal budget is going to get fully paid, it's going to have to make all the states happy. All of them. If they want all their money. Boy, what a great concept for making sure federal spending remains under control.
Right. This is the perfect example of why things are so messed up, because everybody says, oh, well, the Constitution's not working, or our system of government. No, the system of government, the system of government that was created for us has been so bastardized, and it doesn't even resemble the Constitution at all. Anyway, I'm preaching to the choir. So
but no, but this is good. This is because these people, everybody needs to hear this. Everybody needs to understand what we're talking about here. That the key here is to get back to the original intent. The good news is the original intent is awesome. Man, everything that's going on wouldn't be a problem if we were following the Constitution original intent. That's the good news. The bad news is that the original intent has been chipped away at and destroyed for the better part of the last 234 years. been 234 years since the writing of the Constitution, or yeah. And so if it took so long to dwindle it down to what it is, so what do you think the process is going to be like to get it back? It's probably going to be a long, drawn out process. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work. That's the bad news. But it can be done.
Well, it's either going to take a lot of time to get it back there, or it's going to be done in one fell swoop.
Well, if everything collapses and then somebody pulls it out, it rises out of the ashes like a fiery phoenix, then it might be a little faster.
Yeah.
Well, and I, when people say, well, I think it'll be really quick, whatever, nothing is ever quick. Sometimes things seem quick, but you got to take into account the process to get there. As I like to remind people when it comes to those people who suddenly become very famous or suddenly very prosperous, the 20-year overnight success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As I like to call it.
Well, it's like me, I red pilled in 2003, and now it's like I'm so smart, but I've been studying this stuff for nearly 20 years. So it's like it's taken a process to get to the point where I am. So,
and it's funny too, because a lot of us we think we've got so much in our head. We think we've got it figured out, and then something happens where we go, "Whoa, I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did." And you talk about being red pilled. In our friend the War Hamster case, War Hamster had already for the most part been red pilled, but he didn't know as much as he thought he did. And so when he met me, and he's like, first meeting, he walks up to me and says, "I want to be you." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I want to know what you know." I said, "Dude, it's taken my whole life. It might take a while. That's okay. I'm willing to learn." So, but this stuff needs to be known.
I'm very fond of that guy.
Yeah, War Hamster is pretty awesome. But anyway, we're at the top of the hour.
Yep.
We spent an hour talking about this stuff. Hopefully you've learned something.
I didn't see many questions today. You guys have any questions? So I didn't see a lot of questions today. This one actually with the with how the states are apportioned for representation and whatnot. This is the 17th Amendment essentially overrode the 17th Amendment essentially overrode Article 1, Section 3. Correct?
Yeah.
Is that valid?
Yeah, that area that's in brackets where it says appointed or chosen by the state.
I'm talking about Article 1, Section 3 about the Senate and them representing the states.
Right.
Yeah. So
I tell people our biggest problem is democracy. And so I remember one time a New York Times had this headline that said, "Donald Trump is ruining our democracy." And my first response was, "I hope so." I have no problem with the people voting also. There are some democratic parts of our system. The House of Representatives is an example of that. But we are not a pure democracy. We have some democratic procedures in our system, but it's a mixture. It's called a mixed constitution. This is an idea that goes all the way back to Polybius, Montesquieu, and guys like that. And the idea is you don't allow power to be distributed too much in one place. And that includes our hands. We have too much power. We mess it up too.
Mm-hmm.
Or should I use a term that our good friend uses? We'll fork it up too.
Exactly.
So that's the reason why it wasn't designed to be a pure democracy. The states had a voice. The people had a voice. Judges have a little teeny little voice. President had a voice. Everybody has a voice. There's all these different voices, and they all check each other. And ultimately, the strongest voice was ours, but indirectly through our state legislatures.
Right.
State legislatures really was the strongest voice, but our voice was a part of that because we're the ones choosing them, or at least half of them. Even that.
Well, we actually our voice was the strongest because we didn't vote for the senators directly. Right. We voted for the state legislatures, and the state legislatures then voted for the senators. So
But
And
even then, we voted for the people who chose the state senators. So there's even
Right.
another indirect. But now that said, ultimately the people did have the loudest voice. You know how? When we get to Article 1, Section 7, I'll get more into this. Because remember, House of Representatives, voice of the people, right? Senate, voice of states. Who has the power of the purse strings? The House of Representatives.
Mhm.
And if something doesn't get money, it don't happen.
That's right.
And the people are the ones through the House with the power of the purse strings. So ultimately, while this is not a pure democracy, the people did ultimately have the most powerful tool in government, the money.
That's right. On that note, I still don't have any questions. So I think we're gonna, what?
Right.
California, 12% of the population and 33% of the national welfare class. How might that work out under the original tax system?
Well, the
where
welfare
the states
class,
were built by the
first of
feds?
all, wouldn't exist if we were under the original system.
True.
12% of the population. Now that all said, once again, who was it that said they ordered Creator? What was her name?
I'm sorry.
The
Tiffany.
Tiffany. Thank you for that. Thank you for the kind words. Everybody else, latest book, Creator, is out. It's on Amazon right now. I'm going to have copies in my hands probably in the next week or two. I've got a store that I'm creating on my site, so eventually you'll be able to buy them through me directly. But right now it's through Amazon. And hey, Tiffany says it's a good book. I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's one of my better books I've written. Why don't you check it out?
Conservative Cowboy wants to know if a convention of the states is the best way to repeal the 17th Amendment.
It's the only way to repeal the 17th Amendment, in my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else? There's a delay. There's probably about a 20 to 30 second delay from when I speak to when they hear it. So another bot. Well, the bots are showing up in force today. This is like the 5th or 6th bot that I've removed. So that must mean we're getting some traction.
Yeah. And well, if you're not pissing them off, you're not doing it right.
Exactly. So, all right, guys. Well, we're going to call it a day. You know how to find Doug. Doug, go ahead and let him know how to find you.
Well, if you want to email me, constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com, constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com. Websites, douglasvgibbs.com. It's my full name, Douglas V as in victory, Gibbs, GIBBS.com, douglasvgibbs.com, or politicalpistachio.com. That's political pistachio, like the nut.com. That's the blog. And I am working on a page at douglasvgibbs.com called the library page. You can check it out. It's starting to come together. douglasvgibbs.com/library. And the goal is for that page to be your ultimate resource. Anything and everything regarding what I talk about, there's going to be a reference to it. There's going to be, a glossary and articles of everything I talk about. It'll be cataloged and you'll be able to find it. Now that's the goal.
Mud wants an autographed copy.
Shoot me a text. Email at constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com, or you can wait until my store opens, which I believe will be on the 1st of January. Any of them that are bought through my store at douglasvgibbs.com/store will be autographed.
April wants to know when San Juan will resume.
Not the first. Not the first Tuesday night of the year, the second Tuesday night, only because I have a radio interview that first Tuesday night at 4 at 5. And so I can't do both. So I am going to delay that class 1 week.
So it'll be the 11th.
So it'll be the 11th. Yeah. All the rest of them are starting next week.
Oh.
Huntington Beach is on permanent hiatus because this wasn't enough.
Couldn't support it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
couldn't justify driving out there for handful of people.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you again, and everybody enjoy your Tuesday evening. And we will see you as they say, same bad time, same bad channel next Tuesday. So, all right, take care, guys.
God bless.